Does it make a noise?
Let's see.
Hello, testing the microphone.
Yeah, sounds good.
Can you hear me in the back? No? Okay, how do we increase the volume?
Oh. We don't really. Yeah. Let me try. Yeah, I think, again, just holding this upwards.
Hello? Oh, there we go.
It's really,
What's that?
yeah.
How do we get it up here?
Yes.
Hello? 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 I could clip it on my nose or something. Hello? Hello?
I think that's worse. Yeah. I'm going to take it on the other side of your...
Hello? 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 It's got to be way up.
Over there.
Can you do it?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah. Feel like that should do.
Hello? Am I on the speaker? Can you hear me? I'm good. I was in Toastmasters. Yeah, I was. That's great. We're good. Just have a couple minutes, I guess. That'd be great. How long would you like me to speak? Okay. All right. All right. Perfect. The weather's cooperating. Are we already recording? Okay, just going to start my timer.
All right, good evening. My name is Alicia Yokoyama, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's third Tuesday Author Series, which is generously sponsored by the Friends of the Library. And here from the Friends is Janet, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the Friends of the Library.
So welcome to all of you on behalf of the Friends, and I'm really here to, well, thank our author for being here and thank you for being here, but I'm also here to encourage you to become a friend of the library if you're not already. It is $25 a year per person, $40 for family, and then it goes on down from there. $250 if you want. So, but anyway, the Friends sponsor a lot of, I would say, more outreach events that the library sponsors. A lot of, starting from the babies, the books for babies, all the way up to events like tonight for adults. And so I just really want to encourage you to join us. It's a wonderful way to support not only your library, but also the community. That's how I look at it. And if you are a friend of the library, you know, we have 2 bookstores, and every day of the week you get a 15% discount on all of your purchases, and the books are already pretty discounted, so it's a really good deal. Thanks for being here tonight. Oh, good question. So we have one is at City Hall. That's kind of the new, kind of glossy one. And then we have a more traditional kind of used bookstore over on Monroe Street, which is kind of across the street from where New Seasons is at the base of Mountain Park. And it's a really cool bookstore. That's the one I volunteer at, really. So, okay, well, enjoy the author tonight.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Janet. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's author, George Sorensen. Following a long professional writing career in corporate communications, Mr. Sorensen now lives in Lake Oswego and writes books full-time. Tonight he'll be sharing his latest book, Hot Dish Confidential, That Year My Friends Taught Me to Cook, a cooking memoir, which is here to my right. Please give a warm welcome now to George Sorensen. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right, you have it.
I'm George Sorensen. I live in Lake Oswego. I've lived here since the mortgage crash in the fall of 2007. That helps you remember what was going on in 2007. My wife and I moved up here from Los Angeles. We lived in La Cañada, which is right near Pasadena, where I worked for NASA at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory for a couple of years. Before that, we lived in Minnesota, where I went to graduate school and kind of got my anchor stuck, got it stuck in the snow and the cold and the freezing weather, which was very different than where I grew up in San Diego, California, which, as you know, has no weather whatsoever. It's 72 every day. My career has always been focused on writing. It's the thing I've always been the most interested in. I think I'll start at first by talking a little bit about how I got interested in writing and the career that came from that, because it's very hard to earn a living doing that unless you work for a organization or you find yourself in the cash flow of a corporation which will pay you to do that. So I moved away from San Diego because I thought the farther away I could get from my parents, the happier I would be. I spent a year in New York City, and during that time, I actually got one of the more interesting jobs of my life. So some of you are old enough to remember Richard Nixon. Okay, you may remember that he had a vice president named Spiro Agnew, who was like, "Oh, you're doing everything wrong," and then they went, "Oh, but you know what? We caught you doing something wrong," and kicked him out of office. Gerald Ford came up as the vice president, and then of course Nixon resigned, making Ford president. Gerald Ford then nominated Nelson Rockefeller to be the vice president. And Rockefeller Center was right across the street from the McGraw-Hill bookstore where I was working for all of $3 an hour in New York City. And Nelson Rockefeller was being investigated by the Congress to see if he was worthy to be vice president. Well, during that time, it came out that he had been giving a lot of money away, and people were writing him letters asking for money. And I was hired at $6 an hour, twice as much money, to read his mail up in Rockefeller Center. So here I was, a nobody from nowhere, all of about 23 years old, sitting up on the 48th floor of Rock Center with a view of the Empire State Building, and I thought, I've hit the peak of my career. So I read mail for him and wrote responses, and that was really the first time I've ever was paid to do any writing whatsoever. But I wrote responses to Raquel Welch, to other dignitaries who wrote them letters of support and things like that, and they were typed and signed and sent in. So I felt good about that. I left New York because I was starving to death, as you can imagine, and went back to Minnesota, and that's where I stayed. And I left the theater arts graduate program I was in, and I was, what am I going to do here? And I thought I'd get into corporate writing because that's where the money was. I know I could do that. And just as I did that, there was an election that came up, and you remember Ronald Reagan was running against Jimmy Carter for re-election in the 1979 election. Well, do you remember an independent candidate who was trying to be elected at that same time? He had hair this color, big bunch of white hair on his head. His name was John Anderson. He was a Republican, moderate Republican, something we don't see so much now. And he was sort of splitting the difference between the two parties at the time. He decided to have an independent run for the White House, and I became his campaign manager in Minnesota by accident. This is another one of those accidental things that happened to me that I found interesting, but not necessarily lucrative. But by building up these experiences, it gives you things to write about. It gives you perspective. So I spent a year from 78 to 79 supporting this independent candidate. We raised money, we traveled around, I wrote campaign material, appeared on TV. I had Secret Service protection more than once, which is really great. And if you can get it, try and keep it. It's really, you feel really special. The candidate came to the Minnesota State Fair and spoke at a podium like this. And me and the other campaign manager were standing behind him. And there was a Secret Service agent here, all pointed out like this, protecting us. And I felt good for the 20 minutes I had it. So that's another experience. After that, I started working for the 3M company. 3M makes what?
Post-it notes.
Okay, Post-it notes. And who was on the launch team for Post-it notes? Moi. I was the writer on that team. So I was out there freelancing. They go, we have a project for you. Come into this office. And on the office were these little yellow squares. And I went, and? They go, oh, you stick them, they can lift them up. And I thought, what a stupid idea. I go, because you could do the same thing by cutting a piece of paper and putting a piece of tape on it. And they had tape all over the place. Well, I'm glad I kept my mouth shut because I worked on that project for 2 or 3 years, getting it introduced. 3M sent me all over the country to their plants. To Scott Bluff, Nebraska. Ever been there?
Yes.
You have? Why? But Scott Bluff? Really? You know what they made? There's a oh man, good for you. There's a 3M factory there, and remember when cars had fake wood stuck on the side? That comes from Scott Bluff, Nebraska. And I have actually seen the piece of wood that they took a picture of and turned into this big piece of adhesive that goes on your car. But I've been to other plants too that made optical recording, like CDs when they were new, and a lot of different adhesives used on the space shuttle for the tiles that didn't always work correctly. And for a long time. So then after that I met my wife, and I immediately said to her, winter's coming, let's move to Los Angeles. And she's from a small town, La Crosse, Wisconsin. And if you ever have heard her talk, you'll know that because she goes Wisconsin, and she goes, I'm going to go to the mountains, and I think we should get a sailboat in, but the boat, is things. But she was charming, and we moved to Los Angeles, where she got a job with the Walt Disney Company. Well, how did she get the job with the Walt Disney Company? I'll be happy to tell you. And this, don't worry, this is all leading here to this book. I had a friend who called us just before we were going to move, and Jeff Cava, and I had not heard, he went to high school with him, and he goes, I'm going to be in town, can I drop by? Sure, drop by. Jeff, what are you doing? Oh, I'm the Vice President for Human Resources for the Disney Consumer Products Division. I went, Jeff, how quick can you get over here? And she had a job with Disney within 6 weeks of arriving in town. I took care of our 2 kids for the first 5 years. I was a stay-at-home dad, and then I got a job in aerospace working at NASA. We were living up in La Cañada, which is just north of Pasadena. When you watch the Rose Parade on TV, which you will do on New Year's, and they pan up and they show the San Gabriel Mountains that look white. They look white because it's all ash from the fires that have just gone out. We live just at the base of those hills. That's where JPL is, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So that was interesting. Worked on a Mars landing. We crashed, lost the funding. I was able to hang on 2 years. Then I worked in aerospace composites. So when you fly in an airplane, there's floor in the plane, which is made in San Gabriel, California, out of Kevlar honeycomb and a graphic sheet on the top and bottom. And I worked for them for a long time. After the 9/11 attacks, we worked on ballistic laminates. So I was out actually in shooting ranges. I didn't know nothing about guns, but one of the people did, and he set up the ballistic and he'd shoot it to see if the bullet went through. And sure enough, he pulled the trigger and went right through the bullet. I go, let's not try and sell that one, to the pilots. So I worked there a long time. Eventually, when our kids got to be in secondary school, we moved up here. We thought that Lake Ridge High School would be the school they went to, and they did. And they are all grown up now. One of them is running the Lead in the Water program for the Portland City Schools. You've heard of that, and she's an environmental health and safety manager for that. Just accidentally got into it and is just making a career of it. And her son is just graduated from OHSU, and he's doing a residency in anesthesiology at Vanderbilt Medical School in Nash Vegas, Tennessee. And so that's going well for him as well. So now I have time to write full time. And I am, every day, I am got a big yellow sheet of paper and I'm writing, or I'm on the computer editing, or I'm calling some friend like my friend Barry, who is visiting here. I go, Barry, can we please have coffee? I need to talk to a human being, and I know it would be refreshing to talk. And he's very generous with his time and be able to do that too. The genesis for this book, when I was in my 30s and sort of looking around trying to find what I was going to do with the rest of my life, I went over to some friend's house. They invited me over to dinner. And when I walked in, they were cooking on the counter of the kitchen with a little electric rotisserie, a pork roast using a wild boar recipe. And I thought, how is this possible? Don't you need to you couldn't do that with chicken, could you? Or you could with something else. And a friend of mine who was there, he was a very nervous guy. His name in the book is Bjorn. And he's kind of this tall. He's very nervous. He's just twitching. Very nervous. He was smoking. He's the only friend of mine I knew who smoked, and I don't. And it's like, get your cigarette away from me. He goes, Sorensen, you really got to learn to cook. And this is so simple. You really, and I'm a great cook. I'll teach you. And that was the beginning of the book, because how can I organize this? And I got to talking with him, and I decided to do themed dinners. And if I organized a themed dinner, he would come and we'd get other friends and people who thought they knew how to cook. We'd all contribute. We'd all do a recipe from a menu that I would come up with. Then we compare and contrast. And as we did this, chaos broke out. Nobody could agree on anything. And this is what is most interesting about the book, I think, is just the interaction between the people in the kitchen doing the kind of cooking they were doing. So we did Northern Italian. We did the south of France. We did a Charles Dickens Christmas Dinner, and we all dressed up like Dickens characters. And we cooked pheasant pie and a figgy pudding and a trifle, which is more sugar than your doctor would ever allow for you to eat in your entire lifetime. And these were all fun things to do. We did the oceans, where we concentrated on fish. We did TexMex. And one person, Jay Burney, who in the book, decided to bring rattlesnake enchiladas. Now, there was a great deal of discussion about this, whether is this really rattlesnake, or is it frog's legs, or is this what's in here? And Jay just sat back at the table, just stoic. I mean, he would not respond to it. So I do think it was rattlesnake. And we did other events too. Now, for example, you've seen the quote about poison control. Where did that come from? Well, it got to be summer. And Bjorn decided we were going to do a clam bake. But Minnesota's miles away from clams or the ocean. So he decided to do a clam bake in a brand new trash can in his garage on a summer afternoon. And I thought, well, even though it's a new trash can, is this a good idea? Trash cans are galvanized on the outside, right? And would they like melt, or they give out fumes or toxic things? So I called up the Minnesota State Poison Control number. And the person answers, how can I help you? Because I think she sometimes gets calls where, my kid ate a eraser, or something more serious than this. I described this clam bake, and she was like going, why would you want to do that? Can't you find something better to do? So she looked through books and books. She goes, well, I think you might get this metal fume fever, which is described. But she goes, but that's more of an industrial process, and I don't think you necessarily get that from doing the clam bake. So we went to a fishmonger, and we got seaweed, because they packed fish and seaweed when they sent it, and filled the can. Excuse me. We put in kelp, corn, still in the husk, whole chickens, whole lobsters, clams, of course, mussels, everything else you could think of, potatoes, all the way up to the top, filled it with this much water in the bottom, put the lid on it, and lit a fire underneath. And about 35 of us all stood around drinking beer as the afternoon wore on. We saw a police car drive by and gave us one of these, looks, but kept going, so I think we're okay. But having a fire in your driveway under a trash can is not something you would ordinarily see. But it turned out that was a great dinner. And we were up very, very late, keeping the neighbors up and stuff, but it all worked out. So that's basically the story of the events that took place. And in the end, I went on this blind date. I had got a phone call one night about living by myself in a house in St. Paul, still freelancing at different companies, and the phone rings at 10:30 at night. And my friend, Jeannie Young. Jeannie Young is about this tall, and she's like she has the energy of the Tasmanian devil cartoon. She just, got everything, I've got to organize things. I got to have a party. I got to have people over. She's just doing this. She goes, George, I met somebody. You got to meet him. 10:30 at night, I go, Jeannie, what are you talking about? She goes, I met this girl. She's great. You've got to meet her. I go, what do you mean you've met her? Where did you meet her? At a bar. I went, oh, jeez. Well, that's not a very good screening process there, Jeannie. He goes, oh, no, this will be just great. You meet her, and she's wonderful. I go, well, how do you know she's not married? Does she have a boyfriend? Does she have a kid? Does she smoke? What does she do? And he goes, I'll find out. So I got a call the next morning at about 10 o'clock, and it was Jeannie again. And she said, I talked to my friend at work, and it turns out that Jeannie had gone to a birthday party with a friend at a bar, but it was a bunch of people getting together for that event. It wasn't Jeannie hanging out, with a martini and with under red light or with a big mirror or something like that. And she asked all those questions, and they all sort of checked out. I said, if she wants to meet me, have her give me a call. Well, a year later, after the birth of our daughter, we soon moved to Los Angeles. But in doing that, part of the initial meeting that we had was early in the summer. And we got talking about food because I'd been through all of these dinners. And I was interested in the apricot trees I had planted in the front yard. And it was a year that this big volcano in Indonesia had blown up. And there was ash in the air. And somehow it cut down the amount of light. It caused the apricot trees to blossom and bloom. And so I had all these apricots. I decided, let's make jam. So I got the books out, got the funnels, made jam, and every surface in the kitchen was sticky from this process. If you've ever done it and never done it before, you just cannot control where the sugar fluids go. And we entered them at the Minnesota State Fair, which is a huge state fair. The attendance in the first hour of the first day at the Minnesota State Fair is equal to what the Oregon State Fair gets for the entire run of the fair. I mean, and I'm not exaggerating this. One day can have over 100,000 people come to it. We won the blue ribbon for apricot jam, which to Susan's mind meant we had to get married, I guess. And so now we are 32 years later living in Lake Oswego. So that is the way the book ends. I'm giving away the ending to you because it is a happy ending to it. So that's how I got to be a writer and continue to be one today. And that's how things have worked out for us. I know that some of you have some questions about things. What might you like to ask me about this process, the writing process? No, this book, okay, and thus I have another 5 minutes. Okay, thank you already. I was looking for a publisher for this because it's been on my computer for some time. And I was looking on Facebook, and there was a writer I know who had published a book with Flexible Press, a small new press in Minneapolis. And so I wrote the guy an email, and I went through LinkedIn and contacted him that way too. And I go, what are you looking for? He goes, I only publish fiction. And I went, well, isn't creative nonfiction basically the same thing as fiction? He went, well, yeah, I guess it is. Why don't you send me the manuscript? Because I gave him a pitch, sort of like the one I gave you. And he accepted the book within 3 days. So it'd been sitting on my computer languishing after many attempts to sell it. He goes, how come you haven't sold this sooner? He goes, this is funny. He goes, it's like reading a mystery, you know. I go, dude, tell me. Here's where I loop back around. First time I met him in person was up in Seattle at a convention for writers and publishers. And we're sitting around talking, and he's about the same age I am, maybe a little younger. And he says, blah, 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 John Anderson. And I went, pardon me? He goes, he says, yeah, I voted for John Anderson. That's my first person I voted for. I went, well, you know, I was this campaign manager. He goes, oh yeah. He goes, I went to the last big rally they had, which was, 6,000 or 7,000 people on the main quad at the University of Minnesota campus, which is an old traditional campus that has this huge area, larger than a football field, in the middle of it, grass and trees. He goes, you were there? He said, well, yeah. He says, I was standing in the front row holding a sign that said, vote for Anderson. I went, that's interesting. And I got out my phone, and I started looking, and I found a photograph taken from up in the top, looking at this huge, huge crowd. And there on the podium was Anderson, who looked like this, because he was giving a talk to these people. And on the platform behind him, I was one of the people I worked with, Anderson's kids, Anderson's wife, the vice president, who was Pat Lucy, who had been the governor of Wisconsin. Got to know him. And standing in the front row, just barely in view, was this college kid who had hair that was permed, and it went down to here, holding the sign. And I showed this to the publisher. He goes, "That's me." So here was a photo from 1979 of the two of us, which I had, and I could find that we had not met each other, but had been, closely aligned for that many years. So it's interesting where you run into people, like that. Doing it. One more story about the cooking thing was we did a Greek dinner, and one of the people brought an octopus. There was a great deal of conversation and argument about how you have to turn it inside out when you do somehow or other when you do the octopus. But we all dressed in tunics, white sheets, with put a grapevine, and I had one from my yard that had a bunch of little grapes hanging right here. I looked really good. And that was another argument we had to, do I have to wear a tunic, And I'm like, yeah, you're going to look stupid in the photo if you don't. So all the people that weren't wearing the stuff, we made them not be in the picture. Did you raise your hand?
Well, I'm just curious, what's the last thing you made?
The last thing I cooked? You mean like last night, or you mean like when I microwaved some well, I actually microwaved some White Castle burgers for lunch. And that company's from the Midwest. So now, how do I cook now? Well, I do all the cooking. My dear wife is lost. I don't know if she's ever actually been in the kitchen or not, but she expects me to cook. And so my strategy is, you've got the fruit and vegetable thing you've got to do, and that has to be the center of everything. But then how do you cook other things and make them interesting? One of them is searing salmon, right? And I had never, the first time I saw seared salmon was at Disney World in the French Pavilion at Epcot Center. That was the first time I had encountered seared salmon. And how do you cook salmon like this? So I actually said to the waiter, he said, "Let me get the chef." And he brought the chef out. He goes, 3 minutes aside, man. It's like, do it. So I will do that sort of thing to keep it interesting and stuff. And so I try and stay away from frozen stuff. But I even make pizza now from pizza dough. You can get pizza dough either at Central Bakery or Zupan's has it too, or you can make it yourself rather than doing it. So does that answer your question? Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Did you have an editor who reviewed this and made changes in the book before?
Oh yeah, there's no end of people wanting to change what you write. Right. I mean, it's just endless. But the way I do it now is I will write the first draft on a yellow legal tablet, and I just need to get it out. It's called the misery of the first draft. And my wife says she will type it and put it into the computer. But often these tablets will sit on her desk for longer than I might like. But eventually she does, do it. So I now have it in that form. I put the tablets together, I move things around, I read it through it again, and then there's several professionals I turn it over to. I have met through contacts, never in person, an editor in Spokane, Washington, who does freelance editing. And she'll get a hold of Nancy, she'll just rip into it, but she does it in a positive way. There's another proofreader, up here in she was on Vashon Island, but she used to live in Seattle, and she would do some proofreading, more sort of lighter stuff, some developmental editing work. But when she moved to Vashon Island, she bought with her husband an apple orchard. So now it's mostly apple orchard stuff, and if I try and get her to help me, I'm too busy with the apples. So I was just at a convention here a couple weeks ago and ran into another person who does this professionally. But the thing is, not all editors are able to work with you the way you want to work with them. And some are stricter, sort of, about the way to do it. I need someone who doesn't take themselves that seriously. I mean, they do good work, but they're going to yell at me if we have a disagreement about it. So I'm pretty happy with the people I have right now. So yeah, there's a lot of that. And I'll have it redone, but it costs money every time I do it. So.
Did
Yeah.
Anthony Bourdain's work have any influence on you?
Well, my familiarity with him is occasionally watching his show. And he was good on camera. You know, he was able to, carry on conversations. I just always wondered, does he really eat everything? Because it seemed like he would be giant if he had to eat, so he must just eat part of the stuff. But he was good at kind of poking fun at things. I remember one place he went for a sandwich, and he said, yes, and the mysteries of American cheese, kind of letting you know that wouldn't be the cheese he would have picked to put on the sandwich. I think Julie Child ultimately is more of my era, so to speak, and she's in the book. I didn't meet her, but we imitated her a lot. When we were cooking things, we were doing a duck, once, and I had a guy in Los Angeles when I lived there. He was a scientist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and so you would think very knowledgeable about how to contain fire. And ducks have a lot of grease in them, and if that grease gets too hot, right? So he's got the goose on his grill, and he's being real careful with it, and somehow or other somebody went, let me look at the goose, just let the air in, and it blew up. I mean, it just started the fence on fire and everything, and his neighbor came running over with a fire extinguisher, opened it up and unloaded the fire extinguisher on the fence, the goose, everything. They went out to dinner that night, and all the work he put into the goose lost. So you do pick up these interesting stories along the way. Anything else? The favorite dinner? Oh, if I'm going to cook my friends, you want me to invite you over, or what? You do? Okay. You are invited over. That's an interesting question. I just got back from 3 weeks in Europe. My wife and I went on a National Geographic trip to Scotland where we were hiking. Scottish food is good, but British food as a whole isn't that great. And but then we went down to France, and we were on this riverboat where you went from Paris down, and everything was just exquisite small place. But if I were going to do something like that, I think it would be, I do that seared salmon with some kind of an interesting salad, and stay away from potatoes and find some substitute for that. But there's a cookbook, for example, I picked up at UCLA campus when I was down there, and it has a Brussels sprout salad with dates in it. I wouldn't have thought to put those in there, but when I served it, the people that ate it went, I hate Brussels sprouts, but this is the best Brussels sprouts I've ever had, So, yeah.
Do you ever invent your own recipes, or do you
Well,
modify?
you're always doing that. My wife will follow a recipe down to the exact measurement on everything. I can't stand it. I'm a quarter cup, half a cup, whatever seems right. So, Yeah. I should start again. What should we do? How are we doing on time? You're doing great. Okay. Anything else? I have some books up here. They're $20 a piece. I can take cash. If you would like a book and you don't have cash, please take a bookmark, which has the information. Get it on Amazon, and please leave me a review with 5 stars, if possible, if you are so inclined. The more reviews I can get on Amazon, the better the search engines pick up. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, a round of applause for George Sorensen. Thank you. And thank you all for coming this evening. And after you've spoken with George and bought a book, feel free to stop by the table on your way out at the Friends of the Library table, grab a cookie, and if you also wouldn't mind filling out a library event survey, we would really appreciate it. Thank you so much and have a lovely evening.
Thank you for coming.